Hey guys, so I just finished up my chores for the day and I decided that it's time to reward myself. Why? Because killing wasps is hard work. Okay, yeah, I know that's a stretch. Just give it to me. My reward? This guy right here. This is a 1911 A1. Arguably Mr. Browning's most significant contribution to the free world. So significant that even the Chinese, who are not known for copying things that we produce and selling it back to us, decided to make their own copy. The Norinco 1911 A1. Is that noticeable? Significant. Now, about 10 years ago, when I was initially looking for one of these Norinco 1911 A1s, to convert into a race gun, that was the idea, the dream, and everything. Not only was I considered myself lucky to find this one, which seemed to be in pretty decent shape, but I was also able to find this one right here in the box in all of its glory. I don't know if you can call this the Holy Grail scenario, but it was kind of a cool thing to find because it came with everything. So let's do a retro unboxing. Come on. First thing we find is the safety manual and how it operates and reassembly, malfunctions. Now the fun part. Really cool. We got our cleaning rod and brush that came with it originally. An extra mag. It's still sealed in there. And then our 1911 A1. Now, I've never fired this. I don't think it's ever been fired, and it's probably going to stay that way because finding one in such great condition like this is getting harder and harder to do, and I really don't want to ruin it because it's lasted this long in this condition. It's kind of cool just to kind of keep it as pristine as possible. And you never know. In a couple hundred years, this might be worth some big, big money. Everything's broken down and we're ready to start working on tightening up this slide to frame fit. Now, we have to do this in two different operations basically. We're going to be working on the left to right wiggle first, and we're going to do that by tightening up the slide, and you do that by basically just kind of crushing it in a little bit, just a wee little bit. Now, if you've ever watched Mark Novak do that, and it's pretty impressive, but he just basically takes this, puts it in a vise and just kind of crushes them, and he's got it all down by feel. Well, I'm not that confident in my abilities, so I have this guy, which this is by Power Customs, and its whole purpose is to squeeze slides together. So that's what I'm going to be doing on this guy. And first I am going to be working this section right here on both sides because I only need it for lockup for it to be kind of tighter. And then I'll check the back here, which the back seems like it's okay. Most of it's in the front, so I'm going to focus here up front first. Now, this part of the slide, this is the weakest part, and if you get too crazy on it, you can do things that are irreversible. So we're going to take this easy and get it tight with lots of fitting, trial and error. Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to start bumping this a little bit at a time, and it's really easy to go too far, so it's worth trying and then going back to it if you need to, which is always how it seems to be. Nope. I got to go a lot farther. All right, so progress report. The back probably has about a hair's width in between left and right would be my guess. But the big improvement is here up front. The slide used to make contact with the frame when I would pull it to the right. It doesn't do that anymore. Still has a little bit more to go, but we're getting close. And I don't want to zero this out by any means. I just need to get it better. See if I can get it on this time. All right, let's try that. Now you got to be careful when you're doing this, because it is easy to overdo it. When I was working on the back, I actually pinched it so far that I could not get it onto the frame, and I had to use the expanders to open it up a little bit. So there is a way to save yourself if you go too far. Well, I think that's it. Very little left to right movement. I might do a little bit more on the back. I don't want to go too far with it. Yeah, there we go. Really nice. And it was kind of catching a little bit here on the front of the rail. Okay, so we have up and down we need to do now. Before we move on, I want to show you what I had to do in order to get the back of the slide to fit onto the frame, because I had actually went too far when I was squeezing them together, so I had to use these spreaders. And the spreaders work very simply. All you do is you put them into your vise and they will pivot. This will be your fulcrum point, so as you close the vise, it's going to put an outward pressure onto the frame. And it's just like when you're trying to squeeze them together. You go a little bit and then try it, because you can go too far again really easily. So there's a lot of trial and error when using this system. But for the most part, it's pretty controllable and I really like it. Okay, before we get too far down the rabbit hole, I want to show you that ejector. Might be a little bit hard to see. See that little gap opening up there? Now, I'm hoping that it was just a bad job when they were drilling out this pin. They didn't get it completely snug. That's the hope, because I would hate to find out that that's a broken leg right there, and then I will have to figure out how I'm going to get that out, which I do have some ideas, but I would prefer not to have to do it just yet. I don't want this to be too complicated. All right, so good news, I was able to get the old ejector out. It is not broken, so good for that. Now I'll get another one coming because I need to have this thing operational before I do too much more to it. So yeah, slight delay on that part. Okay, so now we need to start worrying about tightening up the slide for the up and down. Now, on the right side here, it's actually pretty tight, so I'm not worried about that. But on the left side here, I have a lot more play, so we're going to be working on that. Now, I'm kind of sad because I made a tool for doing this because I was anticipating having this ejector in the way, and I needed to go ahead and hammer this part down. And so I made this nice little tool. I was very proud of myself, and I'm not even going to get to use it on this go around. I'll save it for another day. But the nice thing is I don't have to worry about that. So I can treat this area just like how I'm going to do everything else and hit it with a hammer. Now, the hammer that I'm using is one that I went ahead and cleaned up the face of it, so that way it doesn't have any scratches or dings or anything while I'm going ahead and closing this gap. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that. And I've never done this part before, so we'll see how it turns out. The tightening of the slide left to right I've done once before, and that was on a Glock. And I used this. That was just a week ago. Okay, so this is the part that I'm most nervous about, but I am going to start tightening. I'll leave this one for last, but I'm going to start right up here up front, and I'm just going to do this first about 3/4 of an inch here, and I'm not going to do heavy blows because I don't want to actually mushroom out the material. So I just want to motivate it to move a couple thou. In case you're wondering, this is a Power Customs frame holder. So and it actually has a filler for inside of the magwell, so that way it keeps it from crushing, which is really nice. I like tools and gadgets and doodads because it helps do things faster and makes the job simpler. All right, so I'm going to start motivating this material down, and I'm just going to lightly tap it. And since I've never done this before, I don't know how much to do. Okay, so that's definitely tighter right there. Wow, that was fairly easy. Let's try right here. And I guess I need to take that out in order to do it. I should just grind that flat is what I should do. That way I don't have to worry about it. Because yeah, it's hitting right there at the back of the slide. If that is flat, then I can put this on with no issues. I'm going to do some work really quick. Alright, so I have the back probably tighter than what I should. I'm going to have to lap this anyway. So I have a little bit of play, but we're going to have to do something about that. So with the front, still got some up and down movement. And still some more. Morning guys, it's the next day, and I'll tell you that last night I ended things where they were because it felt like I was taking 1 step forward and 3 steps back. And I was kind of a little gun shy, no pun intended, that it felt like the vertical play that I was trying to eliminate just wasn't making any progress. So I got it to where it was nice and smooth, and decided, screw it, it's my first attempt and I'll just figure it out at some other point. Well, I woke up this morning and decided, you know, I'm going to learn this or die trying. And if I screw up the frame, I screw up the frame. That's the price of my education. So that's how I went into today. And it worked out. I'll tell you what I did. Now, a couple of things, that I figured out to do differently and what I had to look for came down to how I was actually pinching the rails towards the frame. And before, I was using this small hammer and I was just trying to move it this way. And it's not the most efficient method, and honestly, for the amount of movement that I had to compensate for, not the best. So I changed how I was using it. I was setting it up like this so that way I would get nice firm contact on the area, and then I used a bigger hammer and I smacked it. That way it was a lot more controllable, and the bearing surfaces that I was changing changed more uniformly. So I wish I would have done that to begin with. Now there's a tool for this, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The other thing that I decided to start doing it, and I started it last night, but it came down to this, like I had to know what my point of reference was. And so what I did was I used the slide how it was just fitting normally, and then I came to the front of the frame and I would measure like that, and then I would lift up to see how much play I had. And when I started doing that, and of course I had already had been lapping and changing distances and everything, but it was about 18 to 20,000, and I say 18 to 20,000 because my hands were oily and I had compound on it, and so the frame and the slide was all kind of covered with it. So, but it was a point of reference for me to see if I was moving in the right direction. So if that helps you, then awesome. It's an easy measurement to do, and you don't need too many special tools. You just need a set of calipers. So that was the best thing that I did, which, if you're wondering where we're at right now, I'm sitting at about 6/1000ths of vertical play. And considering that the frame ends about, or the rails end about right here, and this is where I'm measuring, just like minutes of angle, the farther out you get, the more it changes. So I think that's pretty good, and I don't want to tighten it up any more than that because I want the reliability. So I'm keeping this as an A1 GI model to be shootable and hopefully not cause problems. So I'm not going farther than that. All right. The other thing, that I figured out that was causing me issues, which was part of the one step forward, 3 steps back kind of issue, was that when I was moving material up here, I was bending the rails down, and then I would lap, and what ended up happening is that I was just ended up cutting material right here. And then it's like, okay, you're asking, well, how is that? Well, it comes down to if I'm taking and I'm bending this rail down, so I bend it down, but the inside right here stays the same distance, I'm increasing the height of that area, or the bearing surface area, if that makes sense. If not, this should help. The back of the slide, where it goes on right here, see that shelf right there? Well, this distance doesn't change. But if I'm changing the height of this area, and this stays the same, well, obviously it's going to bind. And anything that I do to here, somewhere it's got to give, and it's going to give here on the rail, most likely, or inside the slide. But more likely right, well, I don't know. But somewhere it's going to give. That's going to stay the same. So what I had to do was take a file, and I basically just draw filed here on the front part, because this is where I needed to get on. So I worked it that way, and then I also went back and started using my Sharpie, and I was filling in entirely here at the top of the frame. And I would work the frame dry, no oil, no compound, and see where it was hitting on the top here. And I would specifically file that area. And I kept doing it until I was making more progress and also tightening up the vertical play. So once I got it down, then I went back to lapping or hammering and lapping the slide. So it was a lot of trial and error, and whether I did this the way that you should have done it, or I just made this 10 times harder than probably what it had to be, you know, that's usually how my first time goes. But, you know, I think the end result seems to work out really, really well. I mean, the slide, which is really nice and smooth, and I'm actually kind of excited to shoot it right now. And if it wasn't for the fact that I had that guy out and I need to replace that, I would probably be shooting it, or be putting this back together to shoot it. But I got to order this, which I guess I should go do right now. All right, so let's talk tools really quick. Now, if you're in the position where you're lucky enough to do this, this Powers Customs frame holder, this is really nice. So it's a little pricey. It's like 130 something bucks if I remember correctly. But man, you don't have to worry about taking out your grip screws or crushing the frame or anything. It has a steel insert to fill in the frame, so it works really nice. So that is worth the money. The other thing is this also by Powers Customs for squeezing the slide is well worth it. It makes the job feel a lot more controllable. Now, if you get this, get the expanders also, because you will use it. I used it once. I went a little too far here on the back end, and the reason is because I was originally using, there's two shelves. You got this bottom shelf and then you have this upper shelf. And I was originally using the upper shelf here, and just like, you know, when you're cutting something with a pair of like a set of dikes, that if you come out towards the point and you try cutting, you know, it seems like you got to put a lot more energy into it. But if you go closer towards the pivot point, you know, it can cut things a lot easier. So same thing, when you put it down here on this lower shelf, it can crush things a lot easier. And I had moved it down to the lower shelf and was just going along, and it didn't feel like I had put too much energy into it, and I went too far. And then I got to experience the expanders. So in the expanders, just go in like this, and then as you close the jaws, which here on the bottom, as you close the jaws, it pivots and it just pushes out. So easy to use and worth the money. It saved my slide. So the other thing that I would recommend, and I'm eventually going to either make or get one of these, I'll honestly probably just buy it because it's easier to do that way, is that when you are tightening up these rails, instead of using a hammer, you can buy a punch. It's basically a punch from Brownells, and I'm sure other companies may have them too, but I've seen it on Brownells, and it basically has a little reverse step to go around the rail, and you just smack it with a hammer. So that way it's nice, it's uniform, and it's made to be used with slide fitting bars, so that way you can tighten it up to a specific amount and it zeroes out the rail, so that way you don't go too far. So yeah, more tools that I want to get, need to get, have to get. I'm a tool whore. I'll admit it. I like having stuff. It just makes it so much more fun. Anyway, that's my feedback. Hopefully it's useful if you ever get stuck in doing this, and if you're stuck doing this, you know, I'll be honest, it was a lot of fun. So a little frustrating, but a lot of fun. It's worth doing.